I got a fan letter from a young lady. It was a suicide note. So I called her. I said, "Hey, this is Jimmy Doohan, Scotty of Star Trek." I said, "I'm doing a convention in Indianapolis. I want to see you there."
Like most of Hollywood, the history of science fiction is actually littered with absolute mad lads. And this is the first episode of my series dedicated to the Mad Lads of Sci-Fi. And in today's episode, we're looking at my personal favourite, James Doohan, everyone's favourite chief engineer. So, welcome to Mad Lads of Science Fiction. And this episode is about James Jimmy Doohan, the famous chief engineer of the Starship Enterprise, Scotty himself. An absolute legend in life, and as you'll see later on, even in death, was still up to his mad lad shenanigans. So with that, let's crack on with this. So let's skip straight through to the beginning of the Mad Lad era of Jimmy's life, shall we? So Jimmy joined the Canadian branch of the Royal Artillery in 1939. At this point he was only 19 years old, and it was probably obvious to him at this point that war was going to erupt in Europe, and it was going to be, at that point they assumed it was going to be everything as bloody as World War One. So he was obviously brave just from that point on, joining the artillery at such a young age. By 1940, still at the age of 19, he was already in England, so he would have been part of the first wave of Canadian troops to hit the United Kingdom. And I know that at a certain point during 1940, after the evacuation of Dunkirk and everything, the only fully equipped division in England was a Canadian division. Now, I think people get the wrong idea when you talk about the Canadian Army, especially during World War II. I think out of all of the players, I think certainly from a British perspective and the American perspective, like, we tend to sort of mug off the contribution of the Canadians. We mug it off at our peril. The Canadian Army was hardcore. They were extremely ferocious, extremely brave, extremely cunning. They were some of the best. The Germans regarded them as some sort of shock troops, to be honest with you. They was insanely brave and insanely tough, and it comes from the kind of countryside you've got in Canada, that kind of hard life what men and women led during the first part of the 20th century. Now, also, we shouldn't diminish the fact that he was artilleryman. Now, everybody assumes that just because you're an artillery soldier, you're 20 miles behind the front line and there's very little danger to you. That's actually a very big misconception. Being an artilleryman is extremely dangerous. It was very dangerous in them days, and it is very dangerous to this day. For starters, people tend to go and get their own artillery and shoot back at you, and then all hell breaks loose, doesn't it? So he's in the artillery, which is a dangerous occupation, and he's also part of a dangerous occupation within a dangerous occupation, because he's part of a reconnaissance troop. Yeah, well done, Jimmy. Don't do half measures, do you, son? After spending several years in England training from 1940 to 1944, during which time he actually met a sergeant at Catterick, a garrison in the UK, it's an army barracks, Catterick, from Aberdeen, and he initially based Scotty's accent on the accent of this man he'd met. So all them years later, it's like coming back, he remembered this one man he met during World War II, probably was pissed out of his nut. But Jimmy was tasked on as part of Operation Overlord for D-Day. He was where he was a reconnaissance scout for the artillery. He was part of the second wave in to Juno Beach, and we can all imagine the situation that he found himself in as a young, at that point, 24-year-old. I'm not being funny. I've got 24-year-old relatives, and I see them as babies. Part of the many thousands of men that day that was going in and committing the ultimate sacrifice, and we salute them for it to this day. But Jimmy went in as a lieutenant on D-Day as part of the second wave, part of a reconnaissance troop, where on D-Day itself, Jimmy decided to lead from the front. And leading from the front for Jimmy, he actually took names, because he personally dispatched not one but two snipers that was pinning down his troop and butchering his men. Just let that one sink in. So he's already taken, on the first day alone, he's taken two names. So later on in the day, he's up to his scout duties, and he sees a Sherman tank take a direct hit and explode. And it's a tragedy, obviously, all the men inside and all that. But for Jimmy, it was doubly so, because that tank was actually carrying all of his gambling winnings from the night before. So, yeah. So when everybody else was on the landing crafts and the ships and the aeroplanes, panicking, smoking cigarettes, getting blind drunk, doing everything they can to forget about the horrible situation they're in, peeing their pants and being generally scared, as I would be, Mr. Cool over there is playing cards, winning at cards, and winning a lot of money at cards. Take the opportunity while you can, to make a few bob. But yeah, he see the tank that was carrying his winnings get blown up. So after what I would say already earning the moniker of Mad Lad for his contribution to the events of Operation Overlord and his life in general up to this point, and the gambling, everything, he had to lead his men on an advance across a field in Normandy. But like every field in Normandy at this point during 1944, it was a minefield. He led his entire squad of men, a company of men, successfully across a minefield without losing a single one of them, where they set up camp for the night, and he dispersed his men to cover each angle of attack to prevent a German counterattack. During the night, I know a lot of officers would be thinking to themselves, right, I'm going to company HQ, I'm getting my head down, I have sergeants, I have underlings that are going to look after the men throughout the evening. Those officers weren't Jimmy Doohan, because Jimmy Doohan was up in the night and he was going from position to position, talking to his men, getting information from them, passing the information on, G'ing them up, calming them down, doing everything what a good officer should do. And unfortunately for Jimmy, one of his men was a little bit nervous and a little bit overzealous. So poor old Jimmy was moving between two positions, and one of his men mistook him for a German and shot him 6 times with a Bren gun. Now, a Bren gun is a light machine gun that was operated by the British and Commonwealth forces during World War II. It is a beast. It fires really big bullets, like big massive rifle caliber bullets at high velocity, and it's a murder weapon. It's like a buzzsaw of a machine gun. He got shot 6 times in one sitting. Fortunately for him, the first 4 bullets hit him in the legs, specifically in his knees. 1 bullet shot off his middle finger, and he would do everything during his later acting career to hide this. He would wear prosthetics, he would wear flesh-coloured gloves and everything to hide it. I didn't even know he had a missing finger, and I'm a big Trek fan. Fortunately or unfortunately for him, he was shot in the chest at the same time, and this would have been a completely lethal wound if it wasn't for a cigarette box which was given to him by his brother. So in true Hollywood style, our hero is shot 6 times, and the bullet that would have killed him ricochet off a cigarette box he had in his pocket, which he had only just put there and was only not long given to him by his big brother. Gosh, what a mad lads. So, after being shot 6 times by his own people and killing 2 snipers and watching his gambling winnings go up in flames in a burning tank and leading his men across a minefield and being part of the second wave in as part of an artillery reconnaissance group on D-Day, for him you could have said the war would have been over. I mean, I would have been malingering as long as I could, mate, to not go back to that front line after all that. But not for Jimmy, no. He was actually promoted to the rank of captain, and he decided he wanted to become a pilot. And fortunately for him, in those days, in the Canadian Army and in the Canadian Artillery, they had pilots. These daring young men weren't Spitfire or Hurricane pilots or anything as glamorous as that. No, these are artillery aerial observation platforms. These were slow, low-flying, big, massive targets for German anti-air fire and German fighters and everything. It was not an inviting career prospect. But with 9 fingers, an hole in his chest and his legs mangled, he decided it was time to join his brothers flying those planes. He actually joined a squadron called the 666 Squadron, with his 9 fingers and his legs blown up, legs with holes blown in them, and he was flying an aeroplane called an Oster, a Mark IV Oster, I think it's called, and these were artillery observation spotter planes. So the artillery looses off a few rounds. This aircraft is above the battlefield, tells them, yeah, a couple of degrees to the south, a couple of degrees to the west, and then you've got it right on the German man's head. And because it was that kind of aircraft, they were big targets. The Germans wanted these things shot down, and the standard procedure at the time was to fly your aircraft at 30 foot, yes, that's 30 foot off of the ground, amongst all of the ground clutter like church steeples, hills, forests, everything, so that the ground fire couldn't target you correctly, and any loitering fighters had a great deal of difficulty attacking you as well. Jimmy managed to crash his plane on one occasion because he felt like taking a look at a German U-boat off the coast of Holland. But he survived the crash and ended up back in England. And I think it's at this point his Mad Lad status is already pretty solid, in my opinion. It should be yours by now. But at this point, he decided that after being shot 6 times and crashing his plane and conducting what can only be described as one of the most dangerous missions of World War II, i.e. that kind of artillery spotting mission, he decided that wasn't enough. So one day, just to prove that it could be done, he decided to fly his plane on a slalom trajectory between a row of telegraph poles. And we've seen how high telegraph poles are off the ground. They're just about 30 foot, aren't they, off the ground. With his mangled eggs and his 9 fingers. Yeah, he did that. He proved his point and was severely reprimanded. But hey ho. So, for Jimmy, the war was finally over. What next? So, after World War II, it was a period goes by, and in 1953 he finds himself in London, Ontario, and he hears a radio show, and like everybody who listens to the radio or watches telly or goes to the theatre or anything like that, he decided that he could do a better job than everybody on the radio show. So he enrolled in a drama school with none other than fellow Mad Lad Leslie Nielsen. So during his time in Canada, he actually would commute between New York and London, Ontario for work, and during this period he actually starred in over 4,000 radio shows. It's enough to make him a legend on his own, just that, and 400 TV shows, and we're talking some of the best. I mean, he was in the Twilight Zone, he was in the Outer Limits, he was in he I'm not sure about Outer Limits actually. He was in Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, Man from U.N.C.L.E. He was in Bonanza, all sorts of programs like that. And after this, he sort of makes his way to Hollywood, and in Hollywood he impressed fellow Mad Lad, and we will get to this Mad Lad in another episode, Gene Roddenberry, enough for the part of Scotty. And Jimmy Doohan has always said, and he liked to run through this at all the conventions he was at and all that, his auditioning process for Star Trek. And what actually happened was he told Gene Roddenberry he can do almost any accent, any voice. He's only got to hear it once, and he's a master of it. And you do get people like that who can just reel accents off. It's actually really entertaining. And he said to Gene Roddenberry, he said, I think this character, because the character never had a name yet, I think this character should be Scottish because all of the engineers, all the best engineers are from Scotland. So Gene Roddenberry agreed, and he was like, okay, Scotty was born there. So, you know, and he originally had this really broad, thick accent from Aberdeen, and it has been toned down a bit for the show. It's more of an Edinburgh accent for the show. I can hear that because my mum's Scottish. My mum's Glaswegian though. Do not even go there. And he actually started that as a supporting character that would cameo in shows, but he worked his way into it, and he done a fantastic job in Star Trek. We've seen every episode he's in. Scotty makes the episodes he's in. He's more than just the peripheral character that he started out, and he's well deserved the kind of the way that he was moved into being a full-time character on the show, a series regular. After the 3 series of Star Trek was up, though, Jimmy found it really hard to get any other work because he was just so badly typecast as Montgomery Scott, and I think that is a testament to the acting performance he gave throughout the original series. He did a few parts, and there was a period where he just wasn't working. His only income was literally starting to dribble in from doing one. He done Star Trek the animated series, and he contributed a lot of voices to that, and 2, a lot of it was starting to come from his appearances at conventions, and I think he sort of found like his second life really in conventions. He seemed to really enjoy interacting with Star Trek fans, and to be honest with you, I think out of all of the actors that have ever appeared in Star Trek, he seems to be the one that is the biggest fan of the show, like normies like me and you are, by the way he talks about it. So during this time when Jimmy's on the convention circuit and he's making himself very accessible to the fan base, and he's providing fans with stories, he's listening to everybody's favourite fan theories, he's giving opinions on the crew of the Next Generation or whatever latest film of Star Trek's out, a lady writes to him, and it became apparent to Jimmy that the letter he received from this lady was a suicide note, and he was deeply distressed by this, and the only way he could think to help her, I mean, he could see from the letter that this lady was very upset, and she just wasn't getting the kind of help that she needed, and he didn't know what help to give her. He's a mad lad. He's a legend of a man, and you know he's a very intelligent man, but he's not a psychologist. So he done the only thing he could. He gave this woman what he thought was a reason to carry on, and he wrote back to her and he said, "I'd like to see you and talk to you at the next convention. I'm at so and so place in a month's time. Will you come and see me?" And lo and behold, the woman turned up, and he sat there and he spoke to her. And then when he finished speaking to her, he said, "I've got another convention in another month's time in this city. Can you come down and see me then?" And she did. She turned up and he had a chat with her. That was fine. And this went on for about 18 months. And eventually he lost contact with her. And he was very upset. And I think he sort of felt a bit of a failure at this point. I mean, when you see him being interviewed, about this story, he's very, very profoundly touched by this story. And this situation that happened in his life affecting one of his fans' lives. And he lost contact with the woman, didn't hear nothing, and he thought she was gone. And then 8 years later, she turns up at a convention, and he said, "What the hell happened? I was so worried about you." And she said, "No, I got myself together, and I went off and I studied engineering." What a legend. And this was a running theme in Jimmy's life, actually. After Star Trek, he inspired so many young men and women to go into those STEM subjects and to go into engineering and go off and invent things and fix things and build things and make things and contribute to our world. And this guy's just an actor. He's just a man. He's a man with a pretty significant war record, yeah. But he's still just a man, you know. And I think his contribution is greater than... his contribution is disproportionate to society from the role he had on Star Trek. And let's face facts, Star Trek the original series was always the trio. It was always Kirk, Spock, McCoy. But to be able to carve out that niche and have that influence from being a background character, that singles you out as being something special. And the way he interacted with his fans, and the way he would talk about things, and the way he was so respectful of his fans and his fans' expectations as well, that makes him, in my eyes, a real nice guy, a real legend. Like, I mean, I see him being interviewed by one of Britain's worst interviewers, actually, Terry Wogan, in 1989, and he came on stage, and bear in mind this guy's Canadian and he's of Irish extraction. He knows that the British audience think of Scotty, and they think he's really Scottish. So he came on and he initially was doing that Scotty accent, and he was having his little bit of banter with the presenter and all that. But as the interview progressed, the accent dropped away from him, so he could be his real self. He could gently let people know his true self, rather than just shocking them and being like, "Oh well, actually no, I'm not. I'm Canadian," you know. So yeah, he's a real nice guy. During this period, though, he was offered the chance to direct. He turned down the offer to direct, and the reason he turned down the offer to direct was, again, like a complete absolute legend that he was. He felt that because of his time in World War II, being an officer, he'd given every order that he ever wanted to give. He was fed up with telling people what to do, so he never took the opportunity to direct, and I think that's a shame. I really do. So Jimmy was finding the mid-70s hard. He'd had a few roles, but nothing he could really sink his teeth into since 1969 when Star Trek ended. Obviously he'd done Star Trek the animated series and a few other bits, but not much. So like I said, he's doing conventions, he's getting a little bit of income from that, and Gene Roddenberry comes to him and says, "I'm getting the band back together, I'm doing the motion picture." And he really steps up to the plate. James Doohan, he used his skills in languages and everything like that to actually lay the foundations for the Klingon language we hear in Star Trek. And that's a big deal. People nowadays, you can go to universities in places in the world and do degrees in Klingon nowadays. I'd love to do a degree in Klingon. He was really involved in that, and he really did get on well with every other cast member that he worked with, and he really stuck up for himself with William Shatner, which is no mean feat, because you're standing up to Captain Kirk. But when all this is happening, Jimmy's home life isn't exactly happy and stable 100% of the time. He was married 3 times in his life. The first 2, unfortunately, ended in divorce. The third marriage, though, is another Mad Lad story of his. So Jimmy's doing his convention stuff. Like I said, he used to really enjoy his convention stuff, when a 17-year-old girl catches his eye, and they actually married a day or so after her 18th birthday. I can't believe it. But he did stay with her. He was married to her until the day he died. That was, he met her in the 70s, and she, whoever much younger than him, she stayed with him and cared for him for the remainder of his life. And it was a long and happy and productive life. He starred in 7 of the Star Trek films, and let's face facts here, out of those 7 of the Star Trek films, 4 of them are fucking amazing, and 2 of them are probably my favourite. 2 of my most favourite films, with a third in close after that. So Jimmy had 7 children in his life, including his son Chris, who is is a twin, and he is a actor himself. He's made cameo appearance in 2 of the later Star Trek films. So Jimmy had lingering health issues throughout his entire life, from World War II, being shot 6 times and crashing your aeroplane, and generally living in those times was just bad for you, and it did affect him in later life, and it was sort of exasperated by his lifestyle. He done everything to excess. He was a real drinker, he was a real smoker, he ate what he wanted, he married who he wanted, he was with who he wanted, he done what he wanted, because who are we to tell Jimmy, the hero, what he is, what to do? But it really did affect his health. He got diabetes, liver cirrhosis, osteoarthritis, high blood pressure, he lost his hearing, and towards the end he was getting Alzheimer's, and he had Parkinson's disease, which is no way for a person to go, especially a real hero like him. It's a very sad end. Or is it though? Because for Jimmy, being a mad lad, even in death, you don't stop being a complete mad lad. So it's very well documented that his remains of his ashes were flown into space on 2 separate occasions. The first instance, he achieved suborbital speed in a capsule, and then they came back to Earth and has recovered. The second one, they actually blew up on a Falcon 9. But in true mad lad Jimmy Doohan style, in death, he had himself posthumously smuggled aboard the International Space Station, where part of Scotty, Jimmy Doohan, still exists to this day in orbit of planet Earth, underneath the floorboards of the ISS. What a legend. So a bit of a short video this week. I thought I'd get that video out because it has been the 79th anniversary of D-Day this week, and it's important that we commemorate it. And a man with that legacy and that kind of persona needs celebrating. No, honestly, I know the title Mad Lad strikes up a certain kind of image, a certain kind of character, and loads of people are doing Mad Lad videos on YouTube now, and I genuinely think Jimmy deserves to be part of that. His entire persona, the life he led. I mean, his childhood. His father was a massive drinker, very, very clever man, but a huge drinker, and living with that as a child growing up, that can affect you, and that can hold you back in adult life. But I don't think Jimmy ever let that happen to him. He lived his life to the full. He done what he wanted to do. He lived a good life. And hell, even in death, he's living a good death, isn't he, up there amongst the stars? How many fictional engineers do you know? How many real engineers do you know that can do that? Get themselves smuggled aboard the ISS. I want to get smuggled aboard the ISS when I peg it. Please remember to like and subscribe, and put stuff in the comments about the video, because I do thoroughly enjoy interacting with you guys as an audience. You are so knowledgeable. You're much more knowledgeable on certain subjects than I am, and I love learning from you guys as much as I hope you love watching the videos. Support the channel, help me grow. I want you to subscribe though.